Yeah, do you think the G20 meeting is the beginning of the end of the dollar as a reserve currency of the world?
No, the dollar is going to remain a reserve currency for the time being because there's not really an alternative. The European currency is the alternative right now because the European economy is as big as the American economy, and this currency is now 10 years old. But Europe has tremendous internal problems that may lead someday to the breakup of the European monetary union. Italy's had 7 years with no growth in productivity and wage increases of 3 and 4%. Over the last 7 years, Italian labor costs have gone up 30% compared to Germany's. Spain has the same problem, no growth in productivity. But Spain could compensate for that in the last 5 years with a huge real estate boom. I don't see how Italy can stay in the monetary union going out 10 more years because they're going to be so uncompetitive, they'll have no manufacturing. And manufacturing is still over 20% of Italy's economy. Unless the Italians can reform themselves with a great productivity revolution, they're going to be hopelessly uncompetitive. And the fact is the Italians can't reform themselves. That's why they're Italians. Every time Italy had this problem in the past, they devalued the lira by 30 or 40%. But now they have the European currency, they haven't got the lira, they can't devalue. So Europe has a lot of contradictions. The dollar still accounts for 2/3 of global foreign exchange reserves. The dollar is still the dominant currency in terms of global financial instruments and so on. I think the dollar will remain the dominant currency for the time being. In 20 or 30 years, the Chinese currency might be a rival to the dollar. It'll be a rival to the dollar in East Asia within 5 or 10 years, but right now it's not fully convertible, so it can't really compete. But it will be convertible, I think, in 5 or 6 years, and then it will become a rival to the dollar in Asia. And if China's economy is bigger than our economy in 30 years, as the World Bank is suggesting might happen, then perhaps China will be the threat, not the Europeans. But that's still 25 or 30 years in the future.
Wow.
Yes, right here.
Yeah, a couple things, David. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. With the Chinese, with the war chest that they've got, the trillions of dollars worth of money accumulated from trade resources. What happens if they were to start liquidating $500, $600 billion worth of dollars out of this?
If China began to sell the dollar aggressively, we would see overnight a large increase in U.S. interest rates. The government bond yields that are currently 3.7.5% might go to 5%. And we'd see a lot of pressure on our interest rates. China has been, over the last 5 years, a big buyer of U.S. government securities as it recycles its foreign exchange reserves. And that's helped to restrain U.S. interest rates at least 50 to 100 basis points. So if they reverse those policies, we'll suffer. But China won't do that because China has a vested interest in a good U.S. economy. We take 20% of their exports. They don't want an American recession. The reason we're having this big fiscal stimulus package last week is because they're terrified of a U.S. recession. I was in China twice this autumn. I went there in late September to speak at the Davos World Economic Forum, big regional conference, and I was there just last week for a lot of private meetings, and I can tell you, the Chinese government is terrified of this U.S. recession and now possibly this European recession. They're deeply alarmed, and that's why we've had this big stimulus package. They're coming to Washington tomorrow for the G20 meeting, and they'll be getting a lot of applause for the stimulus package. This makes China look like a very, very responsible player fighting global recession. China did this 10 years ago, during the great East Asian financial crisis in 1998. All these Asian currencies collapsed, 50, 60, 70%. The Indonesian rupee fell 90%. But China, in the midst of this crisis, kept its currency stable and compensated for the downturn by having another infrastructure spending program. Not as big as this one, but still one that helped to contain the recession. China got great applause from the global financial community for keeping its currency stable and helping to contain the East Asian crisis from getting a lot worse. So I think China is showing right now it's very responsible and very, very focused on how it's perceived globally. They have no incentive to stabilize our financial markets unless we do something like attack them with military power and so on. But we're not going to do that because we know we have a high level of defense with China. The fact is we're now so highly integrated with China, we can't afford to have, on either side, a militarist foreign policy or military adventures that would jeopardize this very, very benign set of economic circumstances. Yes, in the back.
Speaking of war chest, can you address your views on the ever-present, never-ending talk of an expanding conflict in the Middle East, specifically with Iran?
Well, the major danger facing us in the year ahead is Iran. And And I've been very concerned for 2 years that the United States or Israel would launch a preemptive attack on Iran's nuclear facilities to stop their nuclear development program. We came very close, actually, a year ago. But we decided in the end not to do it because we knew it would be very, very destructive. It would have led to a doubling of the world oil price. It would have led to Iran unleashing all kinds of new terrorism, not just in the Middle East, but possibly all over the world. So we didn't do it. Israel's been debating this for several months, and several Israeli politicians have said, just since June, Israel must launch an attack immediately. And Mr. Netanyahu, currently a candidate for prime minister in the election going on in February, has promised over and over again in the last 3 months he'll attack Iran immediately because of this nuclear threat. I have to understand the Israeli perspective. They think the Iranians are not like the Soviet Union 60 years ago. They think the Iranians are fundamentally crazy. And if they get a nuclear weapon, they will use it and try and destroy Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. They fundamentally think Iran is capable of killing 1 million of their people with a nuclear weapon. And if you believe that, then you have to stop them from doing it. Now what's going to happen is Iran's going to have an election in May. Iran's right now in a major economic crisis, high inflation, and a very messy economy, and now with the oil price collapsing, that will cripple their position even more. And the hope is the current president can be defeated, can possibly be replaced by Mr. Khatami, who was the president of Iran 5 years ago. Now Khatami was viewed at that time as a reformer. His reforms were held in check by the mullahs. He couldn't do all that he wanted, but he was a far more moderate, benign person than the current president. 2 years ago, after he left the presidency, he came to Chicago for a big rally 3 miles from here, near the airport, to address 40,000 Muslims. I went along to hear his speech. I thought it was extraordinary. He got up and said, "America's a great nation. You're all Muslims, but you're Americans, and you're lucky to be here." I just couldn't believe these comments from an Iranian head of state. It was extraordinary. If he wins the election, I think the chances of doing a deal would increase dramatically, and we might be able to resolve this with Iran disarming and then having a peaceful nuclear program pioneered by the Americans, the Russians, the Europeans, and so on. That's my fantasy, that's my hope. But there are no guarantees. And if the current president's able to get reelected, despite the bad economy, then we can't predict what will happen. And the risk will exist at some point that we'll have to launch this preemptive strike. And it won't be the Americans, it'll be the Israelis. Because they really do think that the Iranians are capable of using these weapons. But this is not Russia in 1945. There'll be a 50-year Cold War. That once they get the weapons, they'll be used. And if you think that, then needless to say, you feel you have the right to use military force. I had a private meeting in Washington with Vice President Cheney in June. I discussed this with him. And I said to him, how do we prevent Israel from launching an attack? And he said to me, Israel has every right to launch an attack. I was very struck by what a hawk he was. And in the administration debates of the last 2 years, he was the man who favored the consideration of the military option. He was the hawk. Other people like Condi Rice were the doves. Condi Rice wanted diplomacy, not military action. Dick Cheney was willing to take a very hardline view on this question. And with Israel, he would also take a hardline view. Yeah. We're out of time. Okay. Well, thank you for your attention. Good luck.